projections yet. That's the next thing that we're going to be working on.
We had those sheets here like 6 months ago when we were, even on the health plan increases, I had about a month ago. I've got it someplace in my
Well,
office.
there's the health plan.
It's separate. I'm just saying though, but it's large
Yeah.
numbers on both of them.
Yeah.
It's in the millions.
Yeah.
I think it's 2.6 and about 2 million for the health plan.
Given that last year,
projections that we were
the
issued.
projections that were done last year through the system were pretty rudimentary. We really want to redo them before we start
And we'll
quoting
have those
numbers
numbers
this year.
before too long.
Yes.
Those projections.
Yeah, I don't know. We will definitely have them by the time we're meeting with the departments to go over this. They need those salary projections to be able to develop their budget. So they have to be developed in the next several weeks.
In my mind, those two issues right there is going to be an aggregate of over $4 million, I'm sure.
I'm not going to speculate one way or another, but we will have that within the next several weeks. And then I'm talking about the health plan increase for January 2009 will be projected, and I want to emphasize, for planning purposes, at 16%. Got to do something, figure that's as good a percentage as any, but that's not meaning that that's what it will be. Okay. So,
Question.
yes.
Tom?
Thank you. I was only going to comment, whenever we have a discussion about salaries, we always have to keep in mind that a great deal of those salaries are revenue offset from other programs or from state and federal funding. So when I'm not familiar enough with the numbers here locally, but because a large percentage of our salaries in HHSA come from state and federal reimbursement, there is an offset. So I just don't want to get too focused on a large number when some of those numbers, whether it be for transportation or other agencies, there is a revenue associated with those. I just don't know what that number is at the present time.
The good thing there is.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. The percentage varies, and so I can't tell you what will be used in the salary projections, but in the past it's been around 60%, 65% county, and about 35 to 40% outside funding. So, okay. Another component of the budget are debts and liabilities. And so kind of the history here, in 2005, amortization schedules were set up for long-term debts and liabilities. These schedules were adhered to in 2005-06 and 2006-07 budgets. In 2007-08, the full scheduled payment for the teeter plan was not budgeted. $500,000 was pulled out of it to put into the contingency fund. And adherence to these schedules is a factor in the county's annual audit and credit rating. It is commented on in the audit that is done annually. So a little bit of background on the teeter plan. It was implemented in 1992, right after the whole realignment thing was set up. It was financially to the advantage of most of the counties in the state to go ahead and implement the teeter plan. And the teeter plan does make sense if the revenues are used to offset the liabilities that are purchased. Basically, in the teeter plan, the county purchases unpaid property tax liability from other governments and gets to keep the tax revenues that are then paid, including penalty fees. So the initial purchase of that liability was about $5.5 million. So that's, we all knew we were starting off with that, and then the county was going to collect those revenues and the additional penalties. The liability is now over $9 million due to using those revenues for operating expenses. Approximately, I think when we tracked it in the thing, it's about 6 or 7 years ago that occurred. They were used for operating expenses rather than paying off the debt, and also due to interest on the debt. You carry a debt, you keep paying interest, and so it's hard to get ahead as long as you're paying the interest. So the amortization schedule that was developed in 2005 by Dennis Huey was intended to reduce the debt to the original $5.5 million over a 7-year period. So we are now what we call refining the teeter plan. And so in the 2007-08 final budget hearing, the board gave direction to create a separate budget unit for the teeter plan revenue and payments. The direction was also that in 2008-09 to apply the teeter revenues toward the debt rather than to operating expenses. That is something that needs to be done. However, you need to know it's pulling what would have otherwise gone into budget unit 1000 out of the general fund and using it towards paying off the debt. And then in 2008-09, the direction was to adhere to the payment schedule. So budget unit 1930 was established, so that is a real budget unit now, and it's just for the teeter plan. And one of the things we want to do in 2008-09 is to update that amortization schedule so that it reflects the experience over the last several years.
Question, Allison.
Yes.
Allison, the way I remember that, there was supposed to be a committee formed with you and the auditor and Mr. Beltrami at that time, the CEO's office, and maybe a member or two of the board to get together and come up. And one of the ideas was maybe it would be a good idea to set that debt aside, or maybe to refinance a COP and combine that into that. Because under the way you're talking about here, it's going to be a big hit in your general fund revenues. Where if we took one of our, see, we're paying off the one, well, that's the pension obligation bond this year. But anyways, we just paid off one of the COPs. We have 3 of them. We paid the one off. Maybe because interest rates are fairly reasonable, if we included that, the highest percentage rate COP we have with the $5.5 million teeter plan, and refinance that on an amortization schedule, it might be one way.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what I support. I thought that was the direction that we were going to have you basically have a meeting or two and talk about all the options. Because what you're talking about here is really just one option. And I think there's a couple other options we could deal with it.
Well, what we're talking about here is the direction we received from the board at that hearing. We certainly can, there are going to be additional discussions.
That's my point, though. I thought the direction was to look at other options, too.
In the hearing, we discussed the option of refinancing and showed that it was more expensive to refinance than to simply pay off what essentially is a loan we've made to ourselves. But we can go back over those numbers if you want, and we can certainly set up a special meeting. The direction was to set up a separate budget unit to apply the teeter revenues and to stick to the payment schedule in this next fiscal year. But we can have additional discussions on this if you want. I have all the materials from last year.
Is that it, John? Tom?
Just a little clarification on that. Sutter Financial came in last week and gave me sort of their updated perspective, unsolicited, but we'd worked with them before to basically refund the 2000 COPs as a negative cash flow right now of about $22,000. Doesn't mean that your idea doesn't have merit to include all of the debt. There's just some things going on in the marketplace right now that I wouldn't recommend doing it. One of the side projects we're working on that I have been successful before with doing is what I call a debt advisory committee. And we certainly intend, after discussions with the auditor and the treasurer tax collector, we'll probably come to you with a proposal for these type of things to be figured out at a committee level, just to talk about some ways that we could restructure some of this debt. So I think your comments are well taken. I think there certainly may be, if we keep a close eye on the market, some opportunities to restructure debt.
Okay.
And one other comment. Supervisor Smith.
Thank you. So, Allison, if you could go back to the previous